Thank you, Adrian. It's my pleasure to chair the opening panel this morning, and we have a great deal of expertise up here on the stage as well as in the audience, so hopefully we can make this interactive. Like Adrian mentioned, if you have questions, we'll save some time at the end, so feel free to either raise your hand or submit them electronically, and we'll make sure to get them answered. I think what I'd like to do to start, instead of me reading off a script, is maybe just go down the line, and if you could introduce yourself and a little bit about your company, just to give us a bit of a flavor of who's up here today. Start with you, Martin.
Hi, I'm Martin Verkoppen. I work for Newmont Gold Corp for the North American Regional Office as a manager of energy and sustainability. I joined the regional team this past summer. Before that, I was involved with the study and all the engineering around Borden, the electric underground mine. My background is mining engineering, and somehow I got into the energy field. So I'm sure that goes for more people. Thank you.
Perfect. Johnny Key with Freeport-McMoRan. I'm the Director of Energy and Power Solutions. We get involved in everything from the power supplies, like over the fence, bringing in the energy, to the regulatory, to the designing of the electric systems or the distribution systems behind the meter. I'm mechanical engineer and somehow found my way into the electrical world, but I've loved it. I started at a utility and I've been at Freeport for 9 years now.
I'm Gordana Slepchev. I'm Chief Operating Officer at Anaconda Mining. We have a small production in Newfoundland. We actually produce gold, for people that didn't know that. So there is a gold mine in Newfoundland, and also we have a development project in Nova Scotia gold. We're looking to finish feasibility study by end of the year and put that in production within the next 2 years. I'm mining engineer by the trade, and my interest into, let's say, renewables is like anybody else here is we want to find better ways to save energy, to be more efficient, and also to, create the impact on the communities we live in.
I am Dennis Stansbury with B2 Gold. I'm a founder, senior vice president of the company. Been with them since inception. We're a company that's only about 11 years old, growing fast around the country. I'm a mining engineer by trade. Lots of mining engineers up here today. And here we all are sitting on a renewables panel. So it's quite a... it shows you where we're headed, and it shows you where we have to be headed. So thank you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, we can't escape energy, we can't escape renewables, and it's an exciting time in the field. I know as a lawyer, there's been a lot of regulatory change in this area on the climate change front and the energy front. We have the Conference of the Parties in Madrid this week, following on the heels of a UN report encouraging greater renewable penetration, so it's everywhere. So for the first question today, I'd like to pick up on one of the themes in Nick's presentation. He touched on a lot of the key drivers for greater renewable penetration, for setting climate change targets, things from carbon pricing to pressure from institutional investors, to rising energy costs, to lower prices of certain technologies. And so I'd like to ask the panel, what are some of the key drivers for you as you look at these issues? Maybe I'll start with you.
Well, for us, the technology has changed so much, and the cost profile of doing renewables has changed so much in the last 5 to 10 years. We built a solar plant at Otjikoto, 5 or 6 years ago. The payback on that plant was 10 years. We're building one at Fekola now. The payback on that plant with the full battery system is 4 years. So that it has to be dependable, it has to be sustainable, and it needs to make us money. We're a publicly traded company. I know people don't want to hear this at a conference like this, but our main job as senior executive of the company is increasing our shareholders' value. So we can't be doing things that cost us, that put us out of business here. So it has to be financially viable. And renewables are now. They've become that way. So my question on that is, then why isn't everybody doing it? But that's one of our main drivers, is it just has to be something that's substantially viable. And in the opening presentation, our costs are going to go right through the roof if we don't do these things. So it's to keep our company long-term in the market at low-cost production, et cetera. We think we just have to move towards renewables to be able to do that.
Thanks, Dennis. Gordana?
Well, those are really good points. The same as Nick mentioned before. There are a lot of pressures from the public nowadays to, establish and have your ESG platform out there, and also as corporate citizens and people to actually decrease our carbon footprint. So, everybody else out there who's investing now are people that are our age or younger, millennials. So what they're concerned about, they're concerned about the future and that this planet is here for a long time to stay. Also, we've seen there is a global agreement that we have to decrease the global warming, and everybody's doing their part. I'm really happy to see that the mining industry, which was characterized as one of the industries that's really slow to change, that is actually taking a pace and picking up, investing in renewables and doing its share to actually get there to help out with the planet. Also, as mentioned before, the cost is the big driver. Like renewables are now more available and for the companies. And also something else that been touched before is the cost and the certainty. So the grids get overloaded, the stability. So if you have your own power plant and you have your solar plant, you don't have to depend on the grid. And we know the projects are not always very close to the grids either. So we're fortunate here in Canada that we have cheap electricity, and for people in the room, about 60% of that electricity comes from renewables. And also there is about 15% that comes from nuclear and power. So we are lucky to have that there. But is that going to be there forever? For sure not. As the demands are growing, industry is growing, there is more people on this planet. So it's good that companies are doing their social share, but also taking care about the business and investing for the certainty of the business.
Great, thank you. So it sounds like a lot of these incentives, a lot of these drivers are starting to line up in a way that can really precipitate change. Obviously, making that change sometimes encounters different challenges. And so I'm wondering, what are some of the key challenges you see in your business, different areas of the business, in terms of achieving some of these climate and energy plans?
Well, a lot of the technology is coming now, and it's just not quite there yet. In Nick's presentation, it was really interesting. The move to gas is an intermediate measure. We're looking at that. We're looking at that at a number of our operations. What we're running into is, I'm going to pick on a company here, Caterpillar, for example. They've got dual fuel engines, but just for a few of their big trucks. They don't have it for their drills. They don't have it for the shovels. They don't have it for a lot of these things. Our company's small enough we can't go out and develop these engines. So we're relying on the manufacturers, or people like Caterpillar and Komatsu and these companies to really step it up, get these engines out there. The gas supply, like in Western Africa where we're at now, is coming. It's coming full steam. Wells are being developed. The supply of that hasn't and I agree it's an intermediate measure, but for the next few years we could cut our emissions drastically if the technology could get just stepped up a little higher. The other issue that really hurts us a lot is there's some proposals for bringing natural gas into Burkina Faso, to use an example. Now the government has stepped in, and Sonabi and Sonabel control the electrical distribution and the fuel distribution in the country, which is great, but now they're going to set the price. And they're going to have probably the tax. We don't know where the taxes are going to land on that. Again, are they going to, can they stay out of their own way and have something very good happen in the country? Or are they going to tax it to death to where people just can't do it? So these countries just, again, like I say, it's the term I use, is staying out of their own way. Can they do that here? Can they realize the benefits that can come from something like this? Hopefully we can convince them. There's a lot of people talking to them now. There's some big steps forward that could happen very quickly with some government support. rather than government roadblocks. And so hopefully around the world, enough of us can put enough pressure on them to keep those roadblocks knocked down and move forward.
Gordana, from the Canadian perspective, especially out on the East Coast, what types of challenges do you see there?
Well, to see it down there is, as the mining companies always that challenge is the mine life, right? So having that certainty in the mine life, in the grades, and also in the gold price. I mean, we're reaping the benefits that the gold is almost $2,000, an ounce. But is it going to stay that way? We don't know. Those are all the things that we have to consider as we consider investing in renewables or changing the fleets and everything else. So even though the renewables are becoming cheaper and more affordable, they're still more expensive than the conventional base. Or per se for us as a company, we actually contract the mining and the blasting. So in our ways, it's cheaper if we contract conventional fleet than buying our own fleet. But I mean, at the end of the day, the biggest challenge for most of the companies is, or the cost comes from two ways, as mentioned before. It's haulage and it's also combination. So crushing and grinding takes most of the energy. We are on the grid, we reap that benefit of the cheap energy from the grid. So there is not much incentive for the companies to get off the grid if they have that commodity over there with the energy price of about 7 to 8 cents per kilowatt. So for us, the challenge is really still for the renewables or for low carbon fleets is really the cost,
So with a bunch of engineers on the panel, certainly these types of challenges, I'm sure, excite you in different ways and lead to different types of solutions, both at the operational level, the strategic level. Johnny, I was wondering, what are some of the solutions that you've seen in driving towards some of these goals in light of the challenges that we've discussed?
Sure. So our relationship with our grid is a little bit different. Typically, we're operating large, long-lived copper mines, and so that merits, significant investment in infrastructure to interconnect into, national grids or wholesale markets, right? In ways that allow competitive forces to continue to drive down costs, right? And so then we see some of the opportunities as described both by Nick and other panelists that our marginal fuel typically isn't diesel, right? And so then our opportunity to implement solutions is kind of cost competitive against existing markets or existing electric supplies. And so we remain and will always remain to be like a very cost-sensitive consumer, cost-sensitive energy consumer. And so, but what we sense is that our customers, copper customers, are both split into kind of the green economy or the clean economy with electric vehicles, energy efficiency, renewable energy, are sort of soaking up a lot of the copper needs, but also our more traditional customers are looking to lower their life cycle costs, or sorry, not life cycle costs, but their life cycle climate impacts of the materials that they use from us. So what we've done is perform massive studies across our portfolio to look at a varying range of integration of renewable energy into those sites to ensure that we're doing the appropriate triage. Where there is opportunity, we're investing. We've done 4 kind of bespoke renewable energy deals over the years, and then we're trying to turn the corner to look at how can we make this scalable and replicable across our sites, and then also working closely with international copper associations, Copper Mark, to make sure that we're extending and embedding the value that we're creating through our energy supplies into the products that we sell for the customer, right? And so I think our strategy is a little bit different because we don't have that high opportunity of avoided diesel fuel, right? Is we have to be a little bit more strategic and intentional about how we're matriculating a lot of forces, environmental forces.
Gordana, did you have some thoughts on solutions, pathways, the strategic operational level?
Well, we've seen from the Nick's presentation that there is a variety of the solutions over there to help out from decarbonizing the fleets, getting battery equipment underground, electrifying, and I believe there would be a lot of talks today, tomorrow, and on Wednesday on all these subjects, but also looking into the basics of the mining, being more lean, avoiding the wastage, and technologies that are coming now and they're present as automation and artificial intelligence. Also, automating trucks. We know that the most energy has been consumed when they stop and they turn, wasting energy, optimizing the whole cycles. Also, don't wait on the dump, don't wait on the excavator. So it goes back to basics of the mining, make sure you don't waste that energy. But also looking at all the solutions, as a panelist on the copper, there are new technologies being developed on in situ leaching. So our crushing and grinding hasn't changed much in 100 or more years. What else could be done over there? We've seen some research here in Canada from Erin Bobitsky, is a professor at the U of T that's been inventing, working on all these new methods with microwaves and ore sorting to decrease the energy. She actually won, not sure if anybody is familiar, the 2019 Crush It Challenge. So there are new technologies that are coming out that would help with all these main energy consumers, which are haulage and basically crushing and grinding. So there's new developments out there, and also we've seen increase in hydrogen, both here domestically. As I read, Glencore has actually implemented some of the hydrogen fleets, but also in Europe there are some trains put in operation in Germany, and also the OEMs are developing the cars and trucks as well that use carbon. And BC has done some steps over there in putting some hydrogen charging stations. So there are new technologies that are coming, and I believe within the next 5 or 6 years we'll be talking different stories on Next Energy and Mines conference.
Yeah, Martin.
Sometimes I also think we just need to look at what we do in the industry and figure out if we still need to do that. So one example I can think of is, and it's sometimes easier to do that with a new operation, a new project that you're starting up. One thing that comes to mind is at Borden, we're evaluating if we really needed compressed air lines. We already made the decision we're not going to use hand tools like jacklegs and stopers. So what are you really using compressed air for? And through some brainstorming and through thinking it through, we were able to eliminate the typically centralized compressors and all of the networks. It has safety benefits. There were some headaches too, don't get me wrong, but we were able to overcome them. And sometimes you just need to go back to start from scratch and figure out, do you really need it, and are there ways around it? And certainly when it comes to electrification and fuel switching, it's not a straightforward exercise, or certainly in existing operations. But there are a lot of benefits of switching, and I think the OEMs have started to come to a point where it's becoming very attractive to at least analyze it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, taking a step back and picking up again on a point that Nick made in his presentation around the importance of targets, both in terms of selling climate change targets, for example, to new employees, or targets for energy use and efficiency to galvanize a corporate vision. Martin, going back to you, do you have targets that you use in your day-to-day work? And I was wondering if you had thoughts on the ideal percentage, or whether there is an ideal percentage of renewable penetration for an operation like yours.
I don't think there's an ideal percentage, to be honest. It's really dependent on the project or operation. For example, our operations in Ontario and Quebec are grid connected with a very low carbon footprint. At costs that are reasonably competitive. So the hurdle for that to get to renewables it's different than when you're looking at a remote mine site where traditionally you may have looked at using diesel generators. The opportunities are just much larger there. So we do have targets. I think the more important point is that in studies for new projects going forward, we have a shadow carbon footprint or carbon price. Not all jurisdictions have carbon pricing in place, and we kind of let that shadow price work its way through the financial analysis so we can come up with a solution that's best for the site.
That's great. So just to pick up on a point that you made earlier, Dennis, around some of the hurdles that have to be overcome to actually drive towards some of these targets. I was going to ask what technologies or strategies need to be in place to support some of these initiatives. And you had mentioned, for example, some of your vehicle suppliers like Caterpillar. But are there other areas where you need to see a certain degree of transition or movement external to the company before you can actually make those internal investments? And I'll maybe turn it back to you, Martin or Johnny.
I can go first. So yeah, when you talk about like high penetration renewables, I think we have to break that down into two things, which in my prior answer I kind of alluded to early on. Is that we have to have projects that are significant in scale to the load, right, that we're talking about. And so a lot of the things we've done have been more like pilot scale at this point than, as compared to the size of our loads, 100 megawatt loads. And so I think that's like the first thing. And then you also it has to be replicable in nature. And so that has to make it into something that isn't just always this very bespoke solution that happened to work out because this confluence of factors, right? And I think once we acknowledge that needs to happen within the industry, the main thing that I see to wide scale adoption would be commercial innovation as opposed to like technological innovation. Oftentimes what we're seeing is our sort of a contract structure that is, fully contracted renewable projects with, 100% taker pays on them, and unless we want to build it ourselves, right, which really isn't the way that we want to deploy our capital. So we're sort of stuck between these two places, between very unattractive contract model, which was grown up through the vertically integrated, regulated monopolies, and then the, okay, well, in the absence of a good solution, we'll just build it ourselves, right? And that's more flexible. But then that's like it's not a great deployment of capital for a mining company. And so what I really think would move us a long way in the direction of success is to find a business model, a contractual model that has a commercial structure in it that enables mining companies who don't like taking on debt and don't like these big taker pays, need to be nimble, but also need to deploy their capital into mining projects to be successful, right? And so we've seen a little bit of innovation in this space with like more leasing models. We've seen shorter term contracts, but we haven't seen this is just a few of the vendors who are kind of interacting in that space as opposed to kind of a larger movement towards there. So unfortunately, I mean, technology has been outpacing technological innovation has been outpacing commercial innovation for 10 plus 15 years, right? And most of that commercial innovation, actually, to your point, Dennis, is stymied by, is often, especially in the US, Canada, and some of these other markets that we see, is stymied by the incentive structures that we have developed to promote the adoption of renewable energy through tax credits or whatever it is. And so that forces us into a rigid contractual model in order to make sure that those benefits flow through the project in advance of sort of a more workable between two counterparties, a more workable solution between two counterparties. So.
Martin, how about you?
I think the industry is also notorious for not being wanting to be the first mover. And I think it goes for a lot of industries, but certainly also for the mining industry. And so, similar to your point about commercial innovation, there's also sometimes, I feel, a hurdle for application in areas that are maybe less than ideal. So when I think of solar opportunities in the far north of Canada, for example, at our project in the Yukon, you know, it's not ideal for solar, certainly in wintertime. And there's quite a hurdle rate. Well, perhaps there's a way where proceeds from carbon taxation can help out to enable people to be the first movers. And those things can also have an impact on communities around it. I mean, if one company already de-risks a certain renewable energy source, then that can have, you know, can serve as an example to others. So I think sometimes that's where government can play a role to kind of pick those strategic projects and help them get along over the hurdle or over the threshold. We've seen something similar at Borden, where we received financial support from the government to be one of the first movers to go to electric equipment underground. There were a lot of headaches that we had to solve with that widespread sort of strategy, and those incentives helped to kind of offset that risk quite a bit.
So I'd like us now to take a step back and pull out the crystal balls, and I kind of like this question, but it allows you to prognosticate a little bit about the future here. And maybe we could start with you, Martin, again, but which energy milestones will be realized first on a widespread basis? Fully electric mines, decarbonized fleets, or 100% renewable energy-powered operations?
It's a tough one. I mean, Nick said he's almost there with his fully renewable energy mines. We're trying to beat him at Borden with a fully electric mine. I just think it's really exciting to see progression on so many different fronts within the industry. Of course, everyone wants the bragging rights, but ultimately, you know, we're all kind of winners if we progress along this trajectory.
Gordana?
Well, I kind of tend to agree, but I think it would be easier for, you know, junior and mid-tiers getting there first, decarbonizing the fleets and, you know, electrifying their mine sites than really going on to renewables. Renewables are more suited for, as mentioned before, to more remote sites and, you know, places where you don't really have that cheap energy that we have a benefit here in Canada. Getting on the grid. So I would say, you know, decarbonizing the fleets and electrifying would, you know, have bigger impact. It's going to become industry standard before, you know, switching to fully 100% renewables.
Dennis or Johnny, would you like to place a bet?
It depends on where you are in the world. It just totally depends on where you are in the world. And like Martin made a great statement earlier, every mine site's different. What can you do there? What size of equipment are you talking about? If you're talking about an underground mine with smaller scale equipment, the technology's there to take that all electric and to take it, run it remotely, and there's a lot of technologies out there to put that, to have an all electric 300-ton truck in the pit. They're not there yet. It's just not there. So again, what scale are you talking about? Where are you in the world? I think it's completely variable depending on each mine site. I guess that's my answer.
And just to add a little nuance to that, it also depends on what you define as each of those things. And so, you know, 100% renewable energy, we hear about companies going 100% renewable energy all the time. But, you know, I think everybody on the panel is really mostly interested in and talking about physical, you know, electrons and service to our sites. And so, you know, I think that if you defined it as like a compliance and accounting scheme, 100% renewable energy mines could be the first. But if you talked about 100% powered renewable energy mines, I think it'll be the last, right? So it's all in the definition.
So one final question before we open it up to the audience. But I was wondering if I could get the panel's thoughts. You know, we have a room here full of service providers, suppliers in the mining, energy sectors. If you had something on your wish list that you could ask for from the industry, and it could be a commercial idea, like you mentioned, Johnny, it could be technological change, some other type of initiative, what would it be if you were to kind of ask the room for something that would really help you achieve your goals?
Well, I mentioned it with the dual fuel engines, for example, that they're experimenting with out there to decarbonize fleets. You know, a good initial step is gas. It really is. It's way cleaner. It's more efficient. In a lot of places, it's lower cost, et cetera. In conversations, I had a conference call with the Caterpillar people. We had people from all over the world on the phone talking about this subject, and they said, well, yeah, but the gas supply isn't dependable in Burkina Faso. Well, it wasn't last year, but you know what? This year, it's changed a lot. There's a couple companies standing in the wings with gas out of Nigeria, with gas out of Ghana. There's a bunch of supply coming in there, and so pick up the pace. Work on this, you know, whether it's electric engines now or whether it's dual fuel engines and stuff. Just, you know, we need more R&D, we need more testing. Martin brought up a great point. Nobody wants serial number 1 on the truck. We want to know it's dependable, but there's been a tremendous amount of testing done on things like this. Let's get it spread throughout the equipment fleets. Let's get it on drills. Let's get it on graders. Let's get it on the entire fleet that we use out there in open pit mining. I think it's electric's gone for underground mining. I think is ahead of it than it is for open pit and this big equipment. So step it up, bring us the stuff. We'll buy it. We'll use it.
Well, I have to say from the producer side is the cost is the big driver. So if electric equipment and battery equipment is cheaper than other equipment, then that's the biggest incentive for the industry. But also, even if you go to other equipment like the pumps, for the suppliers, invest in R&D and have more efficient pumps, because any energy savings is energy savings. And as I mentioned before, for all the companies, for all of us, the big thing is crushing and grinding. Can we have better ways in eliminating the waste? And as we're going through is ore sorting, and even before we get into the crushing and grinding, that's the biggest energy saving. Also the tailings management and everything else. So I would say more on waste, sorting the waste, and helping out actually get better material to the grinding mills.
So yeah, I guess I already kind of put mine out there, but I would just say where the risk of the industry that you want to invest in. And so as a mining company, we want to wear that risk of, the metals that we've decided to invest in and the capital we deploy. And so as there are vendors and financial firms out there that want to invest in renewable energy, and we want to be an off-taker, and we want to, commercialize things. But we have to move away from the model where, the person on the other end of the deal, the customer, the off-taker, is some vertically integrated utility that can just pass its risks on to captive customers, which is really where that model came from. And recognize that, each counterparty within the deal has to wear the appropriate amount of risk. And especially the person who's investing in the deal has to wear the risk of the industry that they deploy their capital into.
Yeah, and of course sharpen your pencils. And I also sometimes, I've seen proposals before from renewable companies that provide service. Make sure you're doing your homework. So even on desktop studies, know what local utilities have for requirements for interconnections, and and protections, that goes a long way. So, and other than that, just excited to see what's coming out in the open pit field for sure. There's not been as much movement as in the underground segment, but that's just more to come, I'm sure. So.
Great. Well, thanks very much. I think we'll open it up to audience questions now.
So I'm going to start with one from Slido, and we'll put our questions on the screen, and then we'll go to the audience and we'll try to get one from each. So just the first question is, what lifetime of mines do we have to consider to lay out the right model of renewable energy for your mine? So it's a question around the life of mine. When does that make sense to consider renewable energy? And I'll just ask if someone has a question in the audience, if you could just put up your hand and we'll throw it over.
So I think the question's open to anyone who...
I'll jump in. So if you're using goal seek based off of the life of mine, you're using the wrong thing. So I mean, this is exactly sort of the idea of the mine needs to be this perpetual off-taker for, you know, any project that gets done. And so I mean, I would look at it as in terms of simple payback, or in terms of some other financial metric, not a metric that is tied to ore body development, which is ever changing, and you know, and so it's probably just starting with the wrong metric initially.
Our experience on solar is, like say, a few years ago at Otjikoto, it was a 10-year payback to build this thing ourselves and pay it off. And now with Fekola that we're building right now, it's about a 4-year payback. So it's come down. I mean, costs of panels are more efficient and they're cheaper. Batteries are way more efficient and they're a lot cheaper. And that's brought the thing down to about a 4-year payback turnaround. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I mean, so every investment we make based on financial metrics, not based on, you know, whether or not I don't know, that the contract would comply with a life of mine, right? And so I would, you know, encourage everybody to sort of speak the language that the customers are speaking. And at the end of the day, even though life of mine is a mining term, it's the financial areas that are making these decisions, not the mine planners who are making these decisions.
Emily Thorne-Corte from Thorne Associates. For the last decade or so, and even today, we've been hearing in terms of low carbon mining about Scope 1 emissions, Scope 2 emissions, right? So Scope 1 being the fossil fuels consumed at your site, and Scope 2 being the electricity. However, we haven't heard much about Scope 3 emissions. And as we look to now, even and the future, we really need to look at, you know, your contractors and your suppliers. I know a lot of mining companies have contractors that they contract for doing the haulage, and as we saw, you know, 30 to 50% of the emissions can be from haulage. So if you're contracting that out, that's not coming into your carbon's footprint. So I had a question for you: is does any company on the panel look already at Scope 3 emissions, and if not, do you have plans to do so now or in the future?
For our company, we do our own work. We very rarely use contractors. We buy our own equipment. We feel we're more efficient, and we have those things under our own control. So we very rarely use contractors for that type of work.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I mean, I sort of have the fortune of being able to say, well, I just happen to be a Scope 2 only person, and that's somebody else's job. And so I personally don't. I know that is something that, you know, we consider and look at. I do think from like a Scope 3 perspective, we look at it a lot from, it's kind of turning it around on ourselves, is that we are oftentimes a Scope 3. And so that's when I talk about getting, you know, looking at the life cycle impact, climate impacts of our products, and ensuring that we're passing that value onto our customers and our participation in Copper Mark and et cetera. I mean, we're trying to address that issue for our customers who are looking into that.
Perhaps we'll just take one question from the screen. I guess this would just be for Dennis and Johnny and perhaps Martin, is do you look, when you're sourcing PV panels, do you look at whether they're recyclable? Is that something, when you're selecting a supplier, is that part of the selection process?
Yeah, we looked at all types of panels. I don't know, Martin, did we look at recyclable? I can't tell you. We've got our SunTrace guys out here, but you know these things have a 20, 25-year life now too. Solar panels a few years ago had a 10-year life, so they last way longer. And I honestly don't know if they're recyclable.
For us, I think this really gets to the point that technological innovation is outpacing, you know, some of the commercial stuff. So one thing that we do look at the reclamation costs, but the idea of you know, recyclable panels is something that is, you know, fairly new to the marketplace, and the emphasis on that is new. So we don't, in any real sense, we do in terms of ensuring that when we are looking at advancing a project, we look at it including the reclamation costs of that project.
We also do look at cradle to grave considerations, so we need to make sure that we don't leave a liability behind. The only real parallel that I can draw is the batteries that we use for underground equipment, out of personal experience, where we also ensure that the suppliers of the equipment, first of all, they own the batteries, we lease them off of them, and we ensure that they have a recycling program in place with reputable recyclers to take them apart by the components and dispose of the leftover batteries, you know, as appropriate as possible.
Okay, my name is Arnold van der Herk. I'm the responsible of the pre-workshop. So I got involved in a project, not in a scope study for closing a mine with Renewables of Newmont in Peru. So we are talking about a lot, especially for gold companies, about operation. But sometimes you have the problem of closing the mine. And the closing the mine is on not only 10 years. In that case, was 40 years. In that moment, renewables are really acceptable. In order. So it's only to put this question on your minds and think about that.
I'm not sure if I understood the question well, but let me just repeat to make sure. So are we thinking about the closing of the mine early in the game, or?
As this example, for example, is a real example. They need to close a mine during 40 years. They will spend about $30 million a year. So in that case, the use of renewables is a good solution, not even better than the grid. Why? Because your IRR or weighted average of capital of your project is 25, 30, even 40 years. This is the great advantage.
So mine closure lifespan and thinking about renewables in that extended context.
Well, as we heard, the renewables, it all depends on the paybacks, of course, but with the mine closure everywhere in the world, you have to put your bonds ahead of time, and this money is left aside for the closure. But all the mines do the closure as we go. You know, you reclaim certain areas of your waste dumps, you know, of the pits and everything else. But basically on the renewables, as Jason mentioned before, that's just a financial decision, and also depends on where your mine site is. You know, if you are close to the grid, as I mentioned, in our case, it doesn't make financial sense to go and build renewables when we have cheap electricity. For other sites, let's say for B2Gold, for the sites that I isolated, building renewables makes more sense, you know. And also, on the other hand, brings that security to the operation that you have your power as required. But as I mentioned, the renewables, depending on financial decisions for the closure, I think that's kind of different story on its own. But as mentioned before, it depends how you, of course, recycle these materials. Can you recycle them? Then you have to account, of course, for the cost of recycling them at the end of the mine life.
The renewables will definitely help our cost profile during reclamation. You know, you're running pumps, you're running things like that, you do have an energy source, so our solar plant would definitely help us with those cost profiles. We do concurrent reclamation of our dumps and stuff as we go, so by the time we get to the end of mine life, a lot of our reclamation is completed. Yeah, it would definitely be a benefit to have renewables to offset some costs at the end of it, potentially even selling back into a grid if you're close enough to do that as a potential way to generate money to cover your reclamation costs. In Namibia, that may be a very, because we're close to the grid there, for example. So that's just a comment on that. I hope that answers your question.
I'm afraid that we'll have to wrap it